I had a whole bunch of good introductions, but I've got 45 minutes to an hour, and so we're going to move fast, talk quick, and not take questions until after the session. So, actually, I deleted that deck, that slide. You just move to the next one.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. I had a bunch of real tough questions for you, but it's a fun time. Although I must say, I asked these questions at a conference about 2 months ago to a whole bunch of managers and technologists that actually do predictive analytics, and they were actually able to answer just about all of them. Just keep on going through all this. So, how many of you in this room can actually answer all these questions right now? That'd be a no. It was interesting that when I was in the meeting, I was presenting to about 200 people. Actually, 90% of them could actually answer all the first four, not the fifth. Actually, excuse me, 1, 3, and 5, they couldn't answer the fourth. They had a hard time understanding what engagement was. Being outside and saying, "Hey, are you engaged?" They're like, "Yes, I've been married a long time now." So, so it's a little bit. So if you go to the next slide, please. So really, this is a crooked. Can you see? Move so that they can see the. There you go. Thank you. So now you can't really see the surfer guy, but anyways. So essentially, looking at all those questions and being able to answer those types of questions, you have a better ability to see what's coming. Without it, you don't have much ability to see what's coming up ahead of you. Just like the surfer who's out on the beach, having a good time, doesn't see the tsunami and tornado coming up behind him, which can be a bit of a bummer for his day. So being able to have the basics and have an understanding of what's going on in the organization just outside traditional HR metrics, such as the bell curve, performance rating, or competencies, or what have you, will give you the better insight to see what's really coming and looking at more future-oriented sources of information and using predictive analytics and the true technologies that make that happen. Go to the next slide. In today's world, even if you knew what was coming, what do you do about it? As somebody that's a VP in the organization or a director, everybody kind of looks the same, right? So you're usually like, does this person want a salary increase, or or would this person be more interested in promotion, or would this person be interested in 35 hours versus 50-hour week? How, as somebody at a director or VP level, really understand what to do to their organizations? I think as an individual manager, managing a small team, they have a very good understanding of what motivates them. As you start to percolate or move up the organizations, they have greater difficulty understanding what to do. So, 5% increase across the board, well, how does that make sense for everybody, or does it not? So what do they do about these things? Should they do a merger and acquisition? Should they transfer an organization? Should they close things down? They're not sure or have enough information to really understand what to do. Next slide. And what is the best way to do this? So this is your everyday manager, right? Sitting at his desk, overwhelmed by information, trying to catch up on the lunch. And so how do you put this in the context of being able to give information to them? Should I stop or?
You can keep going.
Okay.
Just ignore. Sorry.
Not really. So next slide, please.
Is it this one right here?
I didn't want to. I can't see that. Sorry.
Oops. Don't look.
That's my whole slide deck too.
Which?
All right. Page down.
I'm sorry. So this?
Yeah, page down.
Oh.
So how do you get insight as an HR organization today? What are the traditional methods you've been using? So Pulse, employee surveys, historical dashboards, more HR-centric, manager intuition, social mood trackers. Yahoo had this old how you feeling today kind of tracker. I think they took that down after they decided not to merge with Microsoft. Workforce planning, blogs. The funny thing is when I actually showed this method again to the managers before, they kind of chuckled about it. They dumped this stuff and they had some concerns that this wasn't probably the best analytical way to assess how the workforce is doing. We talked a little bit about the workforce planning. They understood the concept of workforce planning, but they weren't sure that HR was the right place to be doing to Today, as an HR-centric workforce planning solution, you're competing against Microsoft Project. You're competing against financial planning, and those are the areas that dominate. And so if you're looking at workforce planning as a traditional HR-centric view, you will never win. You will never be able to convince your managers. It just won't be adopted because they do this every single day. They do it without HR though. But this happens every day. Kind of interesting trivia fact. So workforce planning, actually Oracle has the most customers on workforce planning than any vendor out there. The challenge is they don't sell in HR, they sell in finance. So, next slide, please. So here's the reality of the day. They really know after the fact. So after something's happened. The layoff is coming, then they need to adjust. They can't determine what the root cause. And so let's say a team is not performing and their director or have a large organization, how do they really assess what's going on in the organization? How do they track down to the minutia? Well, Bob and Joe don't get along, and so the project is stagnant and stale, and you can't do anything about it. So how do they really drill down into the root cause of things? As a result, they make gut decisions, sometimes right, sometimes wrong, uncertain of how to implement decisions. And so if you want to do an M&A activity, big process, you want to transfer somebody as an expat from the UK to the US as an individual, huger process, right? I mean, talking about turning on systems, off systems, it seems to be bigger than actual M&A activity. So there's a lot of indecisions and inability to understand what to do about it if they want to take a decision. And unfortunately, HCM is the final step. So as part of, HR practitioners, where have you been in the situations where you've been involved at the very forefront of an M&A or a layoff or what have you? Anybody? Sort of, kind of. Okay. Next slide, please. So I use this slide quite a bit to give kind of a roadmap of where analysts fit into the organization. I'm going to skip the manual. That's really for the mom and pop shops that are running things out of Excel. Basic and foundation are really you have some sort of core HR system in place. You're doing more compliance reporting. When you start to get into transactions, you start to do the operational reporting, which is competencies, performance ratings, that kind of stuff, how long it takes you to do approval. When you start to get in the process, you start to go outside of HR to look at holistic processes. You're looking at true transfers, M&A, layoffs, onboarding scenarios, mass hires. You start to go outside the organization of HR and you say, okay, how long does it take for IT to do this? How long does it take for HR or finance? And what is the true cost and the true time? And what are the bottlenecks? So those are what we call process-centric analytics. Then we start to move into the forecast planning, early modeling, planning, and the predictive. When we start to look at what we call workforce optimization, we really view that as a bucket. You can't do planning without forecasting or predictions. You can't come up with some sort of arbitrary headcount plan without understanding what the business needs and the forecasts are. And you can't do that without predicting where the business is going to go or what are common issues, because they all feed each other. You can't have, like Dr. Jack said, you can't have a static workforce plan because it's just unrealistic. You may have something that's set for today, being created for today, but tomorrow it becomes something that's a bit irrelevant to the business because things change all the time. If you can hit the button. And what we really found is that below the process world, you're really focusing on managing HR, operationally improving it. What is the span of control for your HR reps to employees, providing more benefits, that kind of stuff. You're really, again, just managing HR and making it operationally better. When you start to move up into the process, up to predict, then you're starting to manage the business. You're starting to bring in other functional areas in their content, and their services, and their steps, and their data to really marry it with your HR data so that the business can make better, effective decisions and predict out what's going to happen to the workforce. So what is optimization? So optimization is an integrated solution that consolidates internal and external indicators in order to determine and implement the correct course of action for new or predicted challenges. So you got to understand, business is constantly running in your organization. You can't come in and say, all right, today you're going to build your workforce plan. It doesn't, not going to work that well because business is constantly running. So you have to have the ability to just jump in and have managers do the workforce plans and marry it with what you're doing. And the first place to do that is predictive. So predictive analytics, does anybody really know what predictive is? Can anybody give a good definition of predictive? You guys said you were doing predictive analytics.
Using no impacts to predict future possible increases.
So that's a good thing. So predictive analytics, there's been some confusion that I've actually seen in the marketplace around predictive analytics and what are called key performance indicators. So predictive analytics is really looking at a lot of historical data, things such as performance ratings, such as when's the last time they got a pay increase, when's the last time they had vacation, when's the last time, or what is their manager's performance, how many times have they had a reorganization, and then looking at external data, which is things such as how many positions are open at a competitor, what's the market doing, how much are they paying at a competitor, they have similar positions. And so looking at all this data, typically you should have about 3 years of data, and then mining it to predict what's going to occur in the future. So if you're working with a vendor or whatever, and they're not talking about things like linear regression or the Monte Carlo statistical models, then they don't really have predictive analytics. They have to look for KPIs, which is really just looking historically, manually assessing a baseline, and then saying, oh, if you're above this, then there could be a problem. There's really no meat or no predictiveness about it. It's just intuition. Model and planning is once you're predicted that something's going to occur, either good or bad, and associated with that, what do you do about it? So how can you adjust all these hundreds and even in some cases thousands of indicators that make up somebody's performance or make up whether or not somebody wants to stay at an organization? So if I give this person a 5% increase and I promote them, will that make them stay, make them perform better? And if it does, what is the impact on the rest of the organization? So you promote and give an increase to somebody. Of course, somebody next to them will know about this. So how does that impact them? So let's say somebody's been in the organization 2 years longer, been waiting for promotion. If they're adjusted, will they be unhappy and want to leave? And so you start to see the impacts as you're making these models, or changing and making modeling what is going to happen in the organization. Planning is turning that model into actually something that's implementable. And so either immediately or within the next 3 to 6 months. And so you're updating headcount plans, you're updating the finance plans, you're updating the project plans, you're updating everything that impacts the workers today. And so you have to have those tie-ins with those systems. Implementation is once it's been in the plan and it's time to execute, you kick off all the right activities to support it. Whether it's opening up headcounts, requisitions, or it's actually doing full transfer process or M&A activities or layoffs or whatever it may be. So you start to string together processes when the time is appropriate. So looking at where to plan things out and those sorts of things become important as part of the plans. If you go to the next slide, please. So a little bit more on workforce predictions. And this is obviously an Oracle-centric slide, so bear with the pitch for Oracle technology. At the root, you have your data mining. Above that, you start to have models. So you can have individual models that support individual kind of things you're looking at. Retention, performance, what's the right head count, or what have you. But then you can take these models and you can merge them together in what's called composite models. So that's really where it becomes interesting stuff. So you can start to answer and provide solutions. And so you take retention, performance, head count, and you say, can I deliver on this product? So these 3 predictive models will tell you whether or not you can. And if so, who is the best team to do this? So start to make recommendations of who can do this kind of work. Or even succession planning scenarios. As you're going through and somebody leaves the organization, who are the 5 people, internal and external, that are predicted to perform well in this role? And then from there, you can start to take action. So that's really where the power of models start to become, predictive starts to become apparent. Next slide, please. Modeling and planning. I see these things really tied together because you have to have an understanding of when to take action. So even if you model something, you have to know when to implement it. And so we really look at 3 types of models at a very high level of modeling activities. The first is organizationally. And so if you look at a traditional org chart, if you move one team to another team and you merge it together, that's a type of model. And so what needs to happen out of that is, what's everything that's impacted for that? So let's say there's 1,000 things that need to happen, and just making that simple organizational change. So you're just reorganizing one team into another. But again, it can be 1,000 changes. And so you need to look at what that all means to the organization. Whereas today it's a very manual process. Who's been through a reorg or helped facilitate a reorg? Anybody? How fun was it to do updates to changes post the fact? Yeah. And then usually when it's going on, you're really not sure what happens until after the fact. And so using and blending in predictive analytics as you're making these model changes, you can see that, well, if you merge these two teams, these people are going to be happy, these people are going to be excited, these are the reasons being, and you can flag those up as things you should take your action on as you're making those changes. And so as they're being reorged, you get salary increases, or you may need to do layoffs or transfers to other teams individually. So as you're doing all these models, you need to take those things into account as well. Location planning, I've heard a lot of companies prefer to do this actually over organizational planning. Like NetApp, for example, we'll talk in a sec. They really want to figure out where to open new design centers, or where to close design centers, or merge capabilities, or what have you. And so that would be a location model. So they would tell you what's the right place to go based upon the type of people you're looking for, the demographics, cost, perspectives, education, and that kind of stuff. So it'll help you decide where's the best place to go for the cost. And right now, it's probably pretty important when you're starting to look at things like, China was a good place to outsource manufacturing. Those manufacturing companies are now starting to come up and compete against, U.S. firms that have outsourced. So where's the next place to start to move your manufacturing capabilities to countries that don't want to compete with you directly? Patterns is really looking at things that are occurring in the organization. So let's say you have a retention problem in mass for 20% of your population. This is where you go in and you start to make local policy changes as an organization. So a good example would be like Google, who just gave 10% in mass, a salary increase, gave, I think, a $10,000 bonus, that kind of stuff. Anybody heard about that? Yeah. So Google has had a serious attrition problem. When they figured it out, they actually used predictive analytics, ran the models to see how much it would cost and who would be impacted. And they figured that the best way to retain people in mass was to give a 10% increase and a $10,000 bonus. So whether or not it actually hits their goals, but that's the way they decided to go about doing it. So that's an example of patterns. Next slide, please. Implementation. So in the case of Google, they decided to give a 10% increase and a 10K bonus. You're going to have to implement that, right? So how do you go through and update payroll? How do you make sure they get checks? How do all those things start to run? As well as there's legislation outside the U.S. around bonuses, and so how do you take those things into account around approvals, or if they have a union workforce, how do you account for that as you're implementing this? And so as you're turning this into a process, you have to understand what's occurring in the model. So let's say you do a reorganization and you're transferring people so let's say you've decided to retain a worker through a promotion, through a pay increase, and through a transfer. So three things. It really could be a lot. Let's say you're transferring them from the UK to the US, which is a huge expat thing. Knowing that and taking action of it, the next step would be to say, out of these three things the manager wants to do, we need to now orchestrate it into a process that will walk them through it based upon their given decision. And so being able to string together the processes, the right steps of activities, the right systems, that kind of stuff would be the implementation part. Questions on this? I need to cut this. So I'm sorry for the rush. I'd like to spend more time in that one, but are there questions on this? Has anybody seen anything like this? Does this seem to make sense? Everybody's really excited. So from what we found is that, we found that workforce planning has failed a lot over the last 30 to 40 years because it's driven by HR. You need to really marry it into how the business actually operates, which is project plans, financial planning, have the managers lead it, not have a duplicative process that you're forcing managers to go to. I've done that. I did that at Cisco, and it doesn't work very well, trust me. So think about that as you go forward. The next is you have to start with predictive analytics. You have to know what's going on in the organization by looking at internal and external indicators. If you don't have a good base and understanding what's going on in the organization, the modeling and the planning and implementation parts will fail because you're not giving them the right information to make decisions. So you have to have a good, solid analytical base that spans across the spectrum of internal and external. Question?
So, how do you then connect the data you're getting of what's going on to predict what will be going on?
So predictive analytics, so the way that they have it is you have the ability to mine the data and they correlate things. And so they'll look at, let's say, 5 years of history, and let's say I'll give you a turnover example. And so let's say 2 days ago I left the organization, they would look at my profile and everything that happened with me. I haven't vacation in 2 years. I haven't had a raise in 3. My manager is underperforming. Those sorts of things. They'll look at things that are negatively impacting. And they would say, okay, this person's left, and by the way, Brian's profile fits 50 other people's profile. Let's look at everybody else that has a similar profile, and they'll start to predict who those people are. And they'll give you a certainty factor to it. So somebody that matches my exact profile, the engine will come back and say, well, this Brian or Joe fits Brian's profile, and the others, he's about a 99% accuracy. He'll lead within the next 1 to 3 months. And somebody that maybe has 10 out of 15 of the same things, will say, okay, well, he's maybe about 80%. So he might leave the next 3 to 6 months. So that's how you do it. Other questions? So, next slide. And so how? So Susan Wong is at NetApp. She's the manager of research and analytics, and she's actually doing and implementing these sorts of things at NetApp. So she's going to. We have a different deck.
To get there, and where is that talent actually residing? Is it within a company? Is it within a country or a region within a company? So really looking at external benchmarking, external market analysis to help us determine those things. And then how do we actually mobilize that? How do we actually utilize all of that workforce, whether we bring them into the company through direct hiring, whether it's merger and acquisition, outsourcing, so on and so forth. And then also how do we actually capitalize? So maybe those people are spread out all across the world. How do we actually capitalize on that talent, seeing that we're located in Sunnyvale, California? So as far as what we decided we would focus in on was to really try to provide the business leaders with visibility into a variety of workforce options, not just look at direct hiring. So HR are traditionally, we focused in on direct hiring or maybe contingent workforce, but we haven't been involved in all the other aspects of buy, build, sell, and release. What we wanted to focus in on was across the board, all workforce optimization related projects and programs. This is a model that I've developed over the last year, and it's taken me a while to actually be able to talk people through what this actually means. These are things that every company probably does, but maybe some of the activities within this we do in silos. So there's no overlap, there's no real connectors between each of those different tiles along that model. And what this model helped us as an organization do was actually communicate where those connection points could be, why those connection points aren't there today, and how a group of people can actually combine forces. So I heard in the room before we were actually able to present, like usually people like me or other workforce planning professionals out there, it's a one-man show. There's not a lot of support for it. You're kind of driving it from HR. How do you actually get visibility into the business direction before you actually have to do something about it? So a lot of times when it comes to workforce planning, it's a very reactive way of looking at just talent, direct hiring, and maybe contingent workforce, but not at all the buy, build, lease decisions. So if you see along this dial, there's a bunch of tiles that are in gray. As at NetApp, as we've looked at it, those are all the areas that people across a company can actually look at, work together on, and actually manage workforce optimization projects. And today, I'm just going to talk briefly about the other activities on this dial. The stuff in green, so if you can hit the next button. The stuff in green, that's all stuff that kind of happens outside of HR, happens outside of most leaders throughout the company. It's just a handful of people in strategic marketing maybe, and the CEO and maybe a couple of the executive VPs. At least that's how it works at our company. And the way in which they communicate business strategy or strategic intent is limited. And then for people like me within HR, we actually don't hear about it until we get to the point of we need to bring in 2,000 people over the next 18 months, which is actually the initiative, the charter that HR was facing less than a year ago. And over the last now 11 months, we've brought in, through our staffing organization, like 1,000 people. And so how do we continue to grow up buildings? Because that's what we're in the process of doing now. We own our entire block in Sunnyvale now. And we are thinking about leasing out buildings across the street, because when we look at our facilities organization, when we look at finance, they're going body to body, seat to seat. This is what it's going to look like, and this is what we're going to need. So we have a very strong message and a very strong leadership drive to actually look at better ways to manage our people. And so as we go around the dial, and we look at these final tiles over on the left, we also have to change the way we manage HR. So it's not just about a talent strategy or talent management. It's really looking at how we actually engage all of these different capabilities and combinations of capabilities that are actually touching NetApp. They may not work directly for NetApp, or they may be working, through some type of telecommuting program, or they're part of an outsourced arm. But how do we actually manage all those capabilities and then deliver on strategic intent? What we started to do a little bit before I started working for NetApp, probably 6 months or so before, was we actually were able to put in place a Global Workforce Council. And our Global Workforce Council actually consisted of executive leaders who actually had decision-making authority over all workforce activities. So anything having to do with buying, building, leasing, and selling, so mergers and acquisitions, outsourcing, partnerships. So people across the organization who can actually make decisions on the direction we go in workforce terms. But the initial things that they were addressing before I got there was, where should we outsource, or can we outsource? Where there's some cost benefits that we can get out of outsourcing? So primarily it was around outsourcing. And when I started with NetApp, what we were then moving to was, it's not just about outsourcing. It was a realization, and it's probably been a realization for a lot of organizations over the last 5 to 10 years. It's not just about outsourcing. It's not just about cost. It's about looking at the workforce across the organization, across the world, and how can we actually optimize utilizing that talent, regardless where they are. And so those were the kinds of projects that I was given when I first started. Can you help us understand? Can you bring together a cross-functional team to actually analyze, collect data, analyze, and help us, advise us on where's the workforce going and how can we capitalize on that talent, regardless where they are and regardless if they work directly for NetApp. How can we do that? So over the last 12 months, what we've actually done is form a global workforce operations group that actually is given direction by our Global Workforce Council. And this is just a really high-level overview of how we're structured. And if you look at the top, that's actually the Global Workforce Council members. And right now there's between 5 and 7 individuals that sit on that committee. And it's a combination of our executive VPs and senior VPs who actually have decision-making authority over workforce-related activities. And what we're trying to do, the reason why Brian and I are here is actually to help you understand how business strategy can tie to workforce strategy. And so those members, what they're really doing is interpreting business strategy into workforce optimization type projects or workforce optimization activities. And as they advise the organization, they're also advising the Global Workforce Operations Group on the types of projects they should be focusing in on throughout the organization. So these are actually the high-level drivers of both the Global Workforce Council and the Global Workforce Operations Group. And the biggest reason why Brian and I are here today is because what we're actually laying the foundation for, and it was all timing, it was wonderful timing. The foundation for it is predictive analytics. Right now, in parallel to these activities that I've been involved in, there's been a focus on business intelligence. So we've been building out a business intelligence model. And so we have a good understanding of what it means to collect and do trending on historical information. What predictive can actually add to the equation is looking outside of the organization and not just looking at historical trends. We're also looking and forecasting on what are the future trends. And that's what predictive can add to the equation. And as you see, this center dial is segmented out. We can actually focus in on where predictive can add that power, and predict really adds value to business strategy and competitive advantage type conversations or activities happening in a company. As Dr. Jack was talking about in his presentation, it's not about prescribing anymore. It's really about predicting. And the ability to actually do, those strategic workforce scans outside the organization, as well as at your competitors and within your organization, and combine all that knowledge, is going to add value to actually the development of a solid business strategy. And then the transition between business strategy and workforce strategy is where all that modeling is that Brian presented in his presentation, around modeling what factors are going to come into play, and actually the ability to prescribe these are some outcomes. If you combine your workforce in this way, this is what could happen. And rather than us going through a whole org change only to see the fallout or the change management that didn't happen after the fact. So really providing us with more informed decision-making ability is where workforce analytics can actually add some value. And then also in implementing, the key thing here from a Global Workforce Council perspective and from an HR perspective is it kind of raises HR to a whole new level when it comes to buy, build, lease, and sell decisions. We actually will play a role on the front end because we're part of that transition between business strategy and workforce strategy. We're already on that Global Workforce Council committee. We're sitting there and we're helping to make those decisions, and then we're combining our HR workforce in a very different way in order to drive strategic workforce engagement, strategic workforce development, and strategic workforce hiring. So it kind of comes full circle in the combination of predictive analytics and also building that foundation for workforce optimization type projects. So this is exactly where I'm at right now is, and in talking about what the Global Workforce Council can do for NetApp in the future. It's the ability for us to actually provide a skills taxonomy and to look at it more from a capabilities perspective. Providing analytics that actually analyze the quantity and availability of specific skills or capabilities that might be available around the world. To actually analyze and evaluate the supply and demand of the workforce around the world, and also to be able to forecast models, which until now we haven't been able to do successfully. So that's the stage that we're in right now at NetApp, is really building out the foundation for predictive analytics. Are there any questions?
I know we rushed through this, so I apologize for rushing. But certainly, if there's any questions or what have you, we have 5 minutes to answer. Or we could backtrack to any section and kind of explain it a little bit more.
Yes.
Susan, you said that the workforce about doubled. Was that a result of any planning, or was that mostly reactive, and now there's further planning for additional growth?
It was reactive. Reacting to the change in our industry and how things are consolidating, that would be one, but also the change in how companies are actually doing business. So it changed the kinds of people that we needed, and so we decided here's a number, and then we tried to reach that number instead of starting from business strategy. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the Starbucks cards. It's okay to leave the room.